guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to do my August wrap up. Now I actually didn't do like a part 1, part 2 August wrap up for August because life is just busy and I just haven't really had the time to sit down and dedicate time, and I've also just been a little bit lazy, let's be honest. So I actually do think I have quite a lot of books to talk about, so I do think I'm going to split this into 2 anyway, and I will just do it all in this one take, and I'll just split it into 2 and put it on my channels at different times with not much time in between, but just so you guys don't have a very long video to watch, and I'll give you guys a little bit of break in between. Since the last update I gave you about my reading, I did finish Anne of Avonlea by L.M. Montgomery. This is the second book in the Anne of Green Gables series, and this book we are following Anne. She is 16-17 years old in this book. She goes on some new adventures, she meets some new kindred spirits as she continues her education and just meets more people around her community and thinks more about what her future is going to hold and what she actually wants to do with her future. So I just really love this book. It's just a lovely kind of soft read. Anne is just someone that you just have to kind of love. She's so precocious, she's so like bright and like good spirited, and she's kind of someone who'll always look on the bright side of things, and she'll always be kind of a glass half full person, but she's also like prone to some dramatics, which as someone who's also prone to dramatics now and again, I definitely appreciate. And I gave it a 4 stars, and I'm like happy enough to continue on with the rest of the series, and I'm really happy. I'm really looking forward to seeing what's like next for Anne. The next book I read is Nightshift by, I'm not sure actually if it's Kiare Ladner or Kiare Ladner, but this is a book I had originally received from Bookbreak UK in exchange for an honest review. I just don't have the physical copy of this book anymore, as I left it up in Donegal for someone to read if they wanted to. And this is actually a book that ended up being a little bit different than what I thought it was. I thought it might be slightly thrillery and maybe a little bit psychological, where it turns out it's more of just like a gritty literary fiction about this girl called Maggie, she's South African, but she's in her 20s, she's working in London. This is set I think in the 90s. Really know I think like what she wants to do with her life. She's kind of in like a little bit of like a standstill, and she ends up meeting this other girl who works with her called Sabine, and she quickly becomes really enamored with Sabine. She starts like kind of like hanging out with Sabine a lot. She feels like she doesn't really know if she's like physically attracted or sexually attracted to Sabine, or if she just wants to be Sabine, or if it's like a little bit of like everything. And then Sabine ends up going on to the night shift in where they work, and Maggie follows her, and her days and like her life kind of turns a little bit darker and grittier as she joins this night shift team. And she kind of, as she still socializes with Sabine, like she's kind of drinking more, she's dabbling a little bit in drugs, and her life is just kind of spiraling a little bit. And Sabine is very much of like this give and take kind of person. She never really knows where she fits in Sabine's life, and she doesn't really know if like, does she really know Sabine at all. We're kind of following Maggie as her life just kind of is getting weirder and weirder and darker, and you're kind of hoping that she like pulls herself up out of it and like she makes herself better, and that's kind of what the book is about. And I did really enjoy this book. I liked the kind of the look of the friendship and how like toxic and obsessive like things can get sometimes, and how things like a night shift can also affect like your sleep and how you feel, and if you don't take care of yourself, like night shifts can be really damaging, and like that kind of strange like, you know, like I guess messing with your body, like how your body's natural rhythm and the circadian rhythm, how that, you know, that can affect you. So I enjoyed the pace of this book. It was a very fast read. I read it pretty much in like one sitting in one day, and I felt like it was very like immersive from start to finish. I just kind of got really sucked into it, and I was able to speed through it really really fast. I gave it a 3 stars in the end. Like it was a good read, it just wasn't like amazing for me. The next book I read was 40 Love by Olivia Dade. This is a book that I actually had on my 5 books I wanted to read in like this summer list, and I'm glad to be able to have gotten to this one. I just love the cover of this one so much, and I actually love all of Olivia Dade's covers. I'm not mad into that cartoony cover, like I feel like it's really overdone at the moment, but these ones just really, I really like Olivia Dade's ones. I think they're done really really well. This book we are following 40-year-old Tess. Like she's literally just turned 40, and she's on holiday in this kind of resort in Florida with her friend, and when she's on this holiday resort, she ends up meeting this ex-tennis pro called Lucas who works at the resort. He kind of gives tennis lessons, and he is in his 20s, so there's a good age gap between them, but there's like an immediate spark. They both know they really really fancy each other, and against like her own, I guess, like reservations, she does end up dating Lucas for a little bit, and they slowly start to fall in love. This book, like, it was really really sweet, and I did really enjoy like I really enjoyed the representation as Tess. Like, she is a bigger woman, she's plus size, and while this is that isn't like a really big deal in the book, it, like, she does talk about it a little bit, but I just loved that it was there. It wasn't a big deal, but it was acknowledged that she is a bigger woman. I really loved the age gap between the two. I think that it was dealt with really well, like, as well. Like, it was never really a big issue once, like, Lucas said he was okay with it, that it wasn't something that would worry him, and Tess was the same. Like, they kind of just ran with it then, like, that they were both attracted to each other, but like, yeah, who cares, there's an age gap between them, like, it doesn't really matter. I think I gave this 3.5, but I actually might put it down to a 3, to be honest, because like, it's been a while since I read it now, and it was a good book, but it definitely didn't make like a massive splash like in like my reading life. Like, I can't really remember everything super duper well. Like, it didn't make an impact, if you know what I mean. I enjoyed it for what it was, which was the sweet like romance book, like a holiday romance, and I definitely, if you like romance books, if you want something sweet, you want something fun, definitely pick this up. I think it would be a really, really good one for you. But it wasn't one of my favourite romance books ever, and I'm hoping that maybe if I read a little bit more of Olivia Dade, she might have other books that I would like more than this one, but it was a really good starting point for me for her book. The next book I read was Re-Coil by J.T. Nicholas. This is a book I received from Titan Books, I think a couple of years ago, in exchange for an honest review. I absolutely love this cover as well. I think it is so cool, and this is a, as you can probably tell from the cover, it is a sci-fi. We are following a character called Carter Langston, who is a space salvager. So he goes on to like spaceships that seem to be, you know, abandoned, and he salvages things from them. But in this kind of sci-fi world that humans are now living in, where like, you know, people can live on Earth, they can live on Mars, they can live on the moon, they can live on like a bunch of different space stations, like across space, or across the galaxy, and like there's just so many like space travel is like a thing, it's normal, and people like completely like make their whole life in space. They can make their whole life and career in space. And now immortality has actually been conquered as well. People don't die anymore, because there's now a thing called a coil in people's head, which means that when their physical body dies, whether it be through old age or they are killed or like an accidental death, basically like who they are, their soul, what makes them them, basically goes like connects into another body, and they're just reborn into a brand new body, and like they can go on about their life as normal. The only thing is they have to back up, so they might lose, if you haven't backed up in a few weeks, you might lose a few weeks of your life and not actually remember what you were doing. You could back up every like few minutes, you can back, depending on like how rich you are. You might only be able to back up every couple of months, depending. So when we meet Carter, he is salvaging the ship, and then he is murdered, and he wakes up a couple of weeks later. He can't remember the weeks between when he last backed up to the point he was murdered, but he immediately realises that there's something wrong, something went wrong on that ship, and someone is out to do him harm, because as soon as he wakes up in his new body, someone else tries to kill him. So now Carter has to go and try and find his remaining crew members, wherever they are, whatever body they might happen to be in, and try and figure out what exactly they were doing on that ship. What did they see, or what did they find, which now means that someone somewhere is out to get them. I really, really love the premise of this book. I really love the setting of this like sci-fi, like this space travel, humans in space book, and it definitely reminded me of other books that I've really, really enjoyed, like The Cruel Stars, or the Expanse series, like that type of space travel, like Revenger by Alistair Reynolds, which I also read recently. That kind of space travel is one I really, really like, and it definitely this book had all of those elements, and I really, really enjoyed them. I really enjoyed when Carter goes to like different space stations and what they look like, and he goes to Mars at one point and how people are living on Mars, like under these domes. That was really, really cool. I love the whole like idea around how immortality has been basically you know, tackled in this, how it has been solved, how people can just be reborn, what that means for people who identify as like maybe non-binary or male or female, and or like transgender, and how people can like wake up in a body and not be in a body that suits who they think they are, how some people can be okay with any body they wake up in, how other people have very specific needs. But again, it comes down to how much money you have and how affluent you are if you can actually get the body that you want when you wake up in a new one. The only problem with me in this book, I think, was the pacing. I think it just slowed down a lot for me, and even though it is not a very big book, it felt really long for me, and I just felt like there were some chapters I just felt I was really slow in getting through. There were some moments of action in this book where I felt like I should have been really excited, but I wasn't. I was kind of bored because I felt like they were dragging on. Pacing ended up, despite me really loving a lot of elements in this book, the pacing of the book ended up with me not enjoying my reading experience as much as I wanted it to. This one I gave it a 2.5 stars just because the pacing just kind of let me down a little bit. The next book I read was a memoir, and that was The Little Girl on the Ice Floe by Adélaïde Bon, and this is a very tough non-fiction book, and I'm going to say from the start, I never rated this book like properly, because I feel like, and I normally never have a problem with rating books whether they be memoirs or non-fiction or anything, but for some reason with this book I just wasn't able to rate it, because I think it is just so raw and so visceral in terms of Adélaïde's experience and what she is writing about, that I just couldn't bring myself to like rate her story. This is a book that is all about sexual assault, and this is a book about Adélaïde, who as a young girl, she was only 9 years old when someone followed her into the apartment stairwell where she lived, and he sexually assaulted her and he raped her. And Adélaïde basically, like throughout her life, kind of puts this veil over those moments, and her memory actually kind of ends up, she almost like blocks out what happened, and it still affects her throughout her life, but it's not until she has some kind of breakthrough moments where she realizes just exactly like what happened to her and how it's really affected like her mental health and how she acts and the things like she experiences throughout her life, and things like depression, anxiety and PTSD, how that has followed her from the time she was 9 years old up until like still today when she is in her like 30s. And this is basically a book just from that day and following her as not even on her recovery journey, but more like as she comes to terms with what happened to her. And then we do get a trial near the end of this book where it turns out that this man who raped her, he had done the same to countless young girls in this Paris suburb in the early 90s. This book is just, as I said, it's really raw. There's some really horrific moments in this, both in terms of what happened to Adélaïde and then some of the thoughts and things that she has because of her anxiety and because of her PTSD, and how her experiences as a child, how it has affected her as an adult, and just the things that she thinks. And like it's very hard to read. So yeah, I would definitely, like, if you were to think about going into this, I would definitely just say be cautious going into it. Make sure you are in a really strong place, like emotionally and mentally, for this book. Yeah, it's all in here, so just be really careful. But I definitely just commend Adélaïde for being able to write about what happened to her and being able to put it down on paper. Is just amazing. I got this book originally because I had seen I had gone to an interview between Adélaïde and Louise O'Neill a few years ago at the Dublin Literary Festival, or International Literary Festival in Dublin, and I just really loved the way she talked, and I picked up her book after that. But yeah, just be careful picking it up. It is very visceral, it is very raw, it is very uncomfortable at times, so yeah. Just a warning. The last book I'm going to talk about in this part of the wrap up is Triptych by Karin Slaughter. This is her first book in her Will Trent series, but this is also a spin-off series to her Grant County books, so they are basically all set in the same world, though I think the first few books in the Will Trent series, they don't have much to do with the Grant County series. I think they do cross over at some point in the later books in the Will Trent series, but at the moment they don't. Now, you guys know from my June wrap up, I think it was my June wrap up, I was very angry at Karin Slaughter because she did something in the last book in her Grant County series that I did not like and upset me very much. So I was angry at her going into this book, and I, was prepared to not like this book because of what she had done in her last book, but I really love this book and I gave it a 4.5 stars because I was just absolutely hooked. I really loved everything about this book, and I really feel like I think she had a lot of fun like maybe writing like a new series and new characters, and this book was just done so well. So in this book, first we follow a detective in Atlanta called Michael Ormwood, and we follow him as he is called upon this murder scene, and this very horrific murder scene of this woman who is a prostitute, and she's been killed in her apartment, and she has been beaten, and also her tongue has been cut out. And then we end up meeting this special investigator called Will Trent, who is going to be like our main character of the series, and he comes in to help Michael kind of look at the case, because he feels like he has some similar cases from other places around the area where like maybe they're actually dealing with a serial killer rather than a one-off killer. One of the things I really loved about this book is that we got this like first part of the book where we're introduced to Michael and then we're introduced to Will, and then the book ends up in the second part, the middle part, it flashes back like years, I think about like 15-20 years, and we end up going back into the past and we're following this completely different character, but it ends up completely connecting to the first part of the book, and the way it does, it's just done so well. It was like basically Karin Slaughter gave us like the cards of the book, was like, this is what you're reading, this is the story, and then with the second part she completely flipped over and was just like, haha, like I got just now, like this, like something completely different is happening to what you actually think it is. And I just loved how that was done. I just thought it was so clever of her. Those slow reveals that she did were just done really well, and I just loved Will Trent as a character. And again, I think it was just really lovely reading a new character from her, reading somewhere different from Grant County, reading like, you know, a bigger city, but this character of Will, all socially awkward kind of person, but he actually is someone who like has such like a lovely heart inside of him, and he's like someone who's like, you know, like this 6'5" guy who walks around carrying a little chihuahua, you know, like he's someone like you can't help but love and can't help but root for. And he also is someone who has like a lot of like difficult things in his past that he's dealing with, and he is also, which I really liked in this book, he really badly suffers from dyslexia. He's a very severe form of dyslexia, and we see how that affects his adult life to the point where he finds it very hard to even read like anything, to the point where he always uses kind of a dictation, and he always uses, you know, voice, like a text to voice apps that he can use when he's doing anything on the computer, or when he's talking to people, he'll interview them and he'll record them on a dictaphone rather than having to write things down. And then when he's driving, he finds it really hard to find road signs. So yeah, there's a lot of things in this book in terms around his dyslexia that I've never seen in any other book, and I really enjoyed just that representation, I guess, of someone who does have a severe form of a learning disability, and how it affects his adult life. I think we see it in characters who might be children or teenagers, but not so much in characters who are adults. And I just really enjoyed seeing that, and like I'll be interested to see how maybe that is explored more throughout the series. You love this, as I said, I was completely hooked on it. I just loved everything that Karin did in this. I loved her writing, I loved how she just revealed the whole story, and yeah, I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really loved it. So that is everything I'm going to talk about in this part, and I'll get the second part up of this August wrap up very soon. Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!